The giant metal creatures moved across the planet like death itself, each one standing as tall as a building and twice as wide. Their bodies were part machine and part living flesh, creating monsters that no world had ever seen before. The creatures walked on 6 massive legs that crushed everything beneath them, while their backs carried weapons that could burn through solid rock in seconds. Admiral Crix watched from his command ship as his army destroyed another world. This was the 17th planet his forces had conquered in 3 years, and each victory felt easier than the last. The beings who lived on these worlds were soft and weak, nothing like the strong warriors of his own Zephyrian empire. The current planet had been home to a peaceful race that spent their time mining crystals from deep underground. They had built beautiful cities with tall towers that reached toward the sky, but now those towers were falling under the weight of the Devastator units. That was what Crix called his giant war machines, and the name fit them perfectly. Each Devastator carried enough firepower to level a city block with one shot. The plasma cannons on their backs could melt steel like butter, while the smaller weapons along their sides picked off anything that tried to run. Behind the giant creatures marched thousands of Zephyrian soldiers in their powered armor, looking like giant insects with their 6 arms and hard shells. The mining people had tried to fight back with their small weapons and basic shields, but their efforts lasted only 14 minutes. Crix had timed it himself, watching as their defense ships fell from the sky like burning leaves. Their ground forces had hidden in bunkers, but the Devastators simply walked over the concrete structures and crushed them flat. Another weak species defeated, Crix said to his second-in-command, a smaller Zephyrian named Commander Vex. I do not understand how these soft beings ever learn to travel between stars. They have no strength, no will to fight. Vex studied the tactical display showing the burning planet below. Perhaps they never needed to fight before, Admiral. Many of these species seem to have lived in peace for hundreds of years. Peace makes them weak, Crix replied, his 6 eyes reflecting the light from the destruction below. The strong should rule the weak. That is the natural way of things. The bridge of their command ship was dark and filled with the sound of clicking mandibles as the Zephyrian crew worked at their stations. The ship itself was a massive thing, stretching for miles and carrying enough weapons to destroy a moon. It was just one of many ships in Crix's fleet, but it was the largest and most feared. Vex brought up a star chart on the main display. Admiral, our scouts have found another system that might interest you. The intelligence reports show a species called humans living on several worlds. Their technology appears to be very basic compared to ours. Crix leaned forward to study the information. The humans used chemical rockets to travel between their worlds, which seemed almost primitive. Their weapons were simple metal projectiles and basic energy beams. Their ships looked like metal boxes with engines attached. Humans, Crix repeated the word slowly. I have never heard of this species before. Are they numerous? The reports suggest they have spread to about 12 worlds in their local area. Vex answered. Their population appears to be in the billions, but they show no signs of advanced military capability. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Billions of soft creatures with primitive weapons. This should be entertaining. How long until we can reach their territory? Vex consulted his navigation computer. If we leave within the next cycle, we can be at their outer worlds in 15 standard days. Our scouts report that their main world, the one they call Earth, would make an excellent addition to the Empire. Crix stood up from his command chair, his tall form casting shadows across the bridge. At nearly 8 feet in height, he was considered small for a Zephyrian, but his tactical skills had earned him command of the largest war fleet in the Empire. His dark armor was covered with the symbols of his many victories, each one representing a world that had fallen to his forces. "Prepare the fleet for departure," he ordered. "I want full tactical assessments of all their worlds. Find their weaknesses, map their defenses, and identify their most important targets." The crew began working. Immediately, their multiple arms moving across control panels with practiced efficiency. Within hours, the massive fleet would be moving toward human space, bringing with it the same destruction that had claimed 17 other worlds. As Crix watched his crew prepare for the next conquest, he felt the familiar excitement that came before a new campaign. The humans would fall just like all the others had fallen. Their primitive technology would be no match for the Devastators, and their soft bodies would break easily under Zephyrian weapons. The Admiral had no way of knowing that this next battle would be different from all the others. He could not imagine that these humans might possess something his empire had never encountered before, something that would change everything. Captain Jake Morrison had been running salvage operations in the Outer Rim for 5 years when his ship picked up the emergency signal. The message came through the darkness of space like a scream for help, transmitted in broken galactic standard that his computer could barely translate. Jake was a tall man with brown hair and steady hands that never shook, even in the worst situations. He had served in the Colonial Navy before starting his own salvage business, and he knew the sound of real terror when he heard it. This message was different from the usual calls for help that came from broken-down cargo ships or mining accidents. Ship, the Wanderer, was not much to look at from the outside. It had started life as a cargo freighter, but Jake and his crew had modified it over the years with better engines, stronger shields, and scanning equipment that could find valuable materials in asteroid fields. The ship was their home and their livelihood, carrying them from one salvage job to the next. "Captain, you need to see this," called Lisa Park from the bridge. She was his navigator and communications officer, a smart woman with black hair who could plot a course through any star system. Lisa had joined his crew 3 years ago after her military transport was destroyed in a pirate attack, and Jake had never regretted taking her on dock. Jake made his way to the bridge where Lisa had set up a holographic display showing the message they had received. The image was grainy and filled with static, but it showed something that made Jake's blood run cold. Massive creatures that looked like a cross between machines and living things were tearing through what appeared to be peaceful colony. "Jesus," whispered Bobby Kane, their chief engineer. Bobby was a stocky man with red hair and grease permanently under his fingernails. He had been with Jake since the beginning, and the two men had been through more dangerous situations than either cared to remember. "What the hell are those things?" The holographic recording showed the giant creatures walking through a city, their weapons burning buildings to ash, while smaller figures in armor shot at fleeing civilians. The creatures were enormous, each one the size of a city block, with multiple legs and weapons covering their backs and sides. Jake studied the tactical data that was streaming alongside the visual recording. According to this, they call themselves the Zephyrian Empire. They've been moving through this sector for the past 3 years, conquering everything in their path. Lisa enhanced the image to show one of the giant creatures in more detail. "Look at the size of that thing. Our biggest battleships would barely come up to its knee, and there are hundreds of them." Dr. Helen Carter joined them on the bridge, drawn by the sound of their conversation. Helen was their xenobiologist, a specialist in alien life forms who helped them identify valuable biological materials during their salvage runs. She was a thin woman with gray hair who had spent most of her life studying the strange creatures that lived on distant worlds. "Fascinating," Helen said as she examined the creatures on the display. "They appear to be biomechanical constructs, part living organism and part machine. I've never seen anything like them." "Does it matter what they are?" Bobby asked. Those things could step on our best warships and not even notice. Helen moved closer to the display, studying the way the creatures moved and fought. Actually, it matters quite a lot. Every species has weaknesses, even apex predators like these. The question is whether we can find those weaknesses before they find us. Jake rewound the recording to study the battle tactics being used by the alien forces. They rely entirely on overwhelming force and terror. No finesse, no strategy beyond destroy everything in front of us. That might be their weakness right there, Helen observed. They've probably never faced an enemy that could adapt or think creatively. Most species in this part of the galaxy are peaceful and use conventional military tactics. Lisa was already working at her station, sending out long-range communications. Toward human space. I'm transmitting a priority alert to Colonial Command. They need to know about this threat. Jake nodded, but felt a cold certainty in his stomach. It'll take weeks for that message to reach Earth, and by then, these things might already be at our outer colonies. The recording continued to play, showing the complete destruction of the alien colony. The Zephyrian forces showed no mercy, killing civilians and soldiers alike. Their giant creatures seemed to enjoy the destruction, making sounds that could have been laughter as they crushed buildings and people beneath their massive feet. How many worlds have they taken? Helen asked. Jake checked the data stream again. According to the survivor who sent this message, 17 different star systems have fallen to them. Each conquest took less than a day. Bobby shook his head in disbelief. 17 systems in 3 years. That's faster than any military campaign in recorded history. They're not just conquering, Lisa pointed out. They're completely destroying these civilizations. No survivors, no prisoners, no attempt at occupation. They're wiping out entire species. Helen was still studying the creatures when something caught her attention. Wait, look at this section here. See how they move in perfect coordination? And notice how when one creature changes direction, all the others respond immediately? Jake enhanced the section Helen was pointing to. What are you thinking? They might be networked somehow, connected through some kind of shared consciousness or communication system. That could explain their perfect coordination, but it might also be a vulnerability. How so? Bobby asked. Helen smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. If they're all connected, and disrupting that connection might affect all of them at once, like cutting the strings on a puppet. Jake saved the recording and all the associated data to their main computer. This information could be crucial for Earth's defense, but first they needed to get it to someone who could use it. Lisa, plot a course for the nearest military outpost. We need to get this information to people who can do something with it. As the Wanderer turned toward human space, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. Somewhere out there, an unstoppable alien army was moving toward human territory, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Admiral Crix felt confident as his war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human star system. His 200 Devastator units and 10,000 support ships had never failed to crush any opposition they encountered. The humans would be no different from all the other soft species his empire had conquered. But as his sensors began scanning the system, Crix discovered something unexpected. The humans had not fled from their home world as other species had done. Instead, they had gathered every ship they owned and formed a massive defensive line around the third planet, the one they called Earth. Curious, Crix said as he studied the tactical display. Nearly 3,000 human vessels had arranged themselves in complex formations between his fleet and their world. He could see battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and countless smaller craft creating what looked like a steel wall in space. Commander Vex moved closer to examine the human fleet composition. They mean to make a stand here, Admiral. I count at least 50 capital ships, and hundreds of support vessels. The human fleet was impressive by the standards of most species Krix had encountered. Their ships were well built and appeared to be armed with decent weapons for their technology level. But against 200 devastators and the full might of the Zephyrian fleet, their efforts seemed hopeless. What Krix could not detect was the activity happening throughout the human fleet. In the command center of the flagship, Admiral Lisa Park coordinated with captains across their entire force. Lisa had been promoted rapidly after Jake Morrison's intelligence report reached Earth just in time for them to prepare their defense. All ships, this is Admiral Park, she broadcast on secured frequencies. Remember the plan we've trained for. We need to draw their large creatures into the engagement zone before we activate Operation Mongoose. Make them think we're fighting a conventional battle. Every human ship in the fleet had been modified based on the data Jake Morrison had brought from the Outer Rim. Engineering teams had worked around the clock for weeks, installing new systems and weapons that no other species had ever attempted to use in space combat. Hidden among the debris of what appeared to be destroyed freighters, Captain Jake Morrison floated in a specially designed stealth suit. The experimental armor made him invisible to Zephyrian sensors while providing life support and mobility in the vacuum of space. His mission was more dangerous than anything he had ever attempted, but it was also humanity's best hope for victory. Jake's suit contained enough power for several hours of operation, along with specialized equipment designed by Dr. Helen Carter's research team. They had spent weeks studying the alien technology from the surveillance recordings, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The Zephyrian fleet began its approach with the same tactics they had used on 17 other worlds. Their smaller ships moved forward first, testing the human defenses with long-range weapons. Krix expected the humans to panic and break formation as soon as they realized how outmatched they were. Instead, the human fleet responded with disciplined fire and coordinated movements. Their weapons were primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, but they used them with skill and precision. Several alien cruisers took damage from concentrated human fire, though none were seriously threatened. These humans fight better than expected, Vex observed. Their tactics are more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested. Krix was pleased rather than concerned. Good. I was worried this would be too easy. A real battle will be more entertaining than simply crushing frightened civilians. The engagement continued for several hours as both fleets maneuvered for advantage. The humans gave ground slowly, making the Zephyrians work for every advance. Their formations remained disciplined, even as ships were destroyed by alien weapons, and they seemed to be drawing the attackers toward Earth itself. They're trying to use their planet's gravity well as a tactical advantage, Vex reported. A clever strategy for such a primitive species. It will not save them, Krix replied. Deploy the devastators. Let them see what real power looks like. The massive biomechanical creatures began moving forward through the battle zone, their plasma cannons charging for the devastating barrage that would end human resistance. Each devastator was a weapon of such power that it could destroy multiple ships with each shot. But as the creatures advanced, Jake Morrison began the most dangerous part of his mission. Using his suit's thrusters, he approached the nearest devastator from an angle where its sensors could not detect him. The giant creature was focused on the battle ahead, its attention locked on the human ships it was preparing to destroy. Jake had studied the wreckage from previous battles and learned that the devastators shared certain biological systems. They were not just individual creatures, but part of a larger network that allowed them to coordinate their attacks perfectly. Dr. Helen Carter had theorized that this network might also be their greatest weakness. The neural disruptors Jake carried had been reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian technology and refined by human scientists. Each device was designed to interfere with the bioelectric signals that connected the Creatures to their shared consciousness. Jake reached the Devastator's hull and began attaching the disruptors to key sensory nodes along its massive body. Creature's hide was tough, but the devices were designed to penetrate and interface directly with its nervous system. As Jake worked, he could hear the battle raging around him. Human ships were taking heavy losses as more Zephyrian vessels joined the attack. Time was running out, and if his plan failed, Earth would fall just like all the other worlds. The last disruptor clicked into place, and Jake activated the synchronization signal that would cause all the devices to fire simultaneously. The effect would either cascade through the entire Devastator network, or Jake would have accomplished nothing except getting himself killed. "Come on," Jake whispered as he drifted away from the creature. "Show me that human engineering can beat alien biology." The disruptors activated with a pulse of energy that Jake could feel even through his suit. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the massive Devastator began to convulse, its movements becoming erratic as neural feedback cascaded through its systems. But Jake had been right about the network connection. The neural disruption spread from one creature to all the others, causing 200 Devastators to lose coordination simultaneously. Some began firing on their own ships, others simply shut down completely, and a few began attacking each other in confusion. "What is happening?" Crix demanded as his perfect formation dissolved into chaos. "Why are the Devastators malfunctioning?" "Jake." Morrison smiled inside his helmet as he watched the alien fleet fall apart. "Welcome to Earth," he said quietly. "We fight dirty here." The chaos among the Devastators gave Admiral Lisa Park the opening she had been waiting for. With the giant biomechanical creatures disabled or attacking each other, the Zephyrian fleet had lost its primary advantage. Now it was time to show them what human military doctrine could accomplish when desperation met innovation. "All ships, execute Operation Mongoose," Lisa broadcast across the human fleet. "Show them what happens when you back humans into a corner." The retreating human vessels suddenly reversed course with a coordination that surprised even Crix. But what shocked the Zephyrian commander was not the reversal itself, but what happened next. Human ships began disappearing and reappearing throughout his formation, using their FTL drives in ways that no military force had ever attempted. "Commander," Vex stared at his tactical display in disbelief. "Admiral, they're using their faster-than-light drives as weapons. They're jumping directly into our formations and ramming our ships." A human destroyer materialized inside a Zephyrian cruiser, its reinforced prow tearing through the alien vessels, hulled before jumping away again. Another human ship appeared above a group of enemy fighters and dropped what could only be described as a gravity bomb, crushing the smaller craft under artificial mass. "Impossible," Crix said, watching his carefully organized fleet dissolve into confusion. The energy requirements for such maneuvers should tear their ships apart. But the humans had spent weeks preparing for this battle, and their engineers had found ways to modify their ships that no other species would have considered. Every vessel in the fleet had been equipped with experimental jump drives that allowed for short-range teleportation, even though the technology was dangerous and untested. The human battleship New York appeared directly in front of a Zephyrian heavy cruiser and fired all weapons at point-blank range before jumping away. The alien ship exploded in a ball of plasma and debris that took out two nearby vessels. Dr. Helen Carter had been right about human adaptability. While other species followed conventional military tactics, humans were willing to try anything that might work, even if it seemed insane. They turned their cargo ships into kinetic weapons, modified their passenger liners to carry gravity bombs, and used their exploration vessels as suicide rams. Jake Morrison was still floating among the disabled Devastators, but his mission was far from over. He had boarded one of the creatures through a maintenance port and was now working his way through its biological corridors toward the central nervous system. The inside of the Devastator was like nothing Jake had ever seen. Walls of living tissue pulsed with bioelectric current, while mechanical components were integrated so seamlessly with organic systems that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Following the schematics Dr. Carter had prepared from their analysis of the creatures, Jake made his way to what could best be described as the brain chamber. Here, a massive organic computer processed information from thousands of sensors and coordinated with other Devastators through quantum communication links. Jake's real target was not the creature itself, but the communication system that connected it to the Zephyrian military network. Every Devastator contained a quantum transmitter that allowed instant communication across galactic distances. If Jake could access that system, he could deliver a payload that would cripple the entire Zephyrian war machine. The virus he carried had been designed by Earth's best computer scientists specifically for Zephyrian systems. It was not just malicious code, but a piece of software that could adapt and spread through any network it encountered. The virus would corrupt navigation data, scramble communications, and turn the aliens' own technology against them. Jake connected his equipment to the quantum transmitter and began the upload process. The virus would spread through the communication network to every Zephyrian ship and base. But first, it had to penetrate the alien security systems. Meanwhile, the space battle continued with increasing intensity. Human ships were taking heavy losses, but they were inflicting damage on the Zephyrian fleet that Crix had never experienced before. The aliens had superior technology and more ships, but they were not prepared for opponents who refused to follow conventional tactics. A human freighter appeared in the middle of a Zephyrian squadron and released its entire cargo hold full of kinetic projectiles. The simple metal rods, accelerated to near-light speed, tore through alien hulls like they were made of paper. "These humans are insane," Vex reported. "They're using civilian vessels as weapons platforms. They're turning cargo containers into missiles. They're even ramming our ships with their escape pods." Crix was beginning to understand that he had underestimated humanity in ways that might prove fatal to his entire fleet. These were not the soft, peaceful beings his scouts had reported. These were warriors who fought with a creativity and desperation he had never encountered. The virus Jake had uploaded was beginning to take effect throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Ships started receiving contradictory orders as their communication systems became corrupted. Navigation computers began plotting courses into stars instead of safe hyperspace jumps. Weapon systems turned on their own vessels as targeting data became scrambled. "Admiral," Vex called urgently, "we're receiving reports of system failures throughout the fleet. Our computers are malfunctioning, and the Devastators are completely out of control." On the bridge of her flagship, Admiral Park watched the Zephyrian formation fall apart as human tactics continued to surprise and overwhelm their enemies. Her ships were suffering losses, but they were winning a battle that everyone had expected them to lose. "All ships maintain pressure," she ordered. "Don't give them time to reorganize. Keep jumping, keep hitting them, and keep them guessing about what we'll do next." Jake Morrison completed his upload and began making his way back to the Devastators. Exterior, the virus was spreading through the Zephyrian network faster than their security systems could respond to it. Within hours, it would reach every ship and base in their empire, turning their own technology into a weapon against them. As Jake emerged from the creature's hull, he could see the battle turning decisively in humanity's favor. Zephyrian ships were exploding or fleeing in all directions, while human vessels continued their relentless assault. The empire that had crushed 17 worlds was finally meeting an enemy it could not defeat. The tide of war had turned, and it had turned because one human had been willing to attempt something that should have been impossible. Admiral Crix watched his mighty fleet crumble around him as human tactics continued to defy everything he understood about warfare. The virus spreading through his computer systems was causing chaos on every level, turning his own technology against him in ways he had never imagined possible. Ships throughout his fleet were reporting the same problems. Navigation systems were plotting impossible courses that would send vessels into black holes or stars. Communication arrays were broadcasting random noise instead of orders. Weapon systems were targeting friendly vessels instead of human ships. How are they doing this? Crix demanded as another report of system failures reached his bridge. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Commander Vex was studying the tactical displays with growing alarm. Admiral, I think they've somehow infected our entire network with malicious software. Every ship that tries to communicate with another vessel spreads the infection further. The human fleet continued its assault with a ferocity that surprised even Admiral Lisa Park. Her captains were improvising tactics that no military academy had ever taught, using their ships in ways that should have been impossible, but somehow worked. Captain Danny Wright of the destroyer Phoenix had modified his ship's cargo bay to launch kinetic projectiles at incredible speeds. His crew was using mining equipment to accelerate chunks of metal to near-light velocity, creating weapons that could punch through the heaviest Zephyrian armor. Target that cruiser, Wright ordered his weapons officer. Full spread maximum velocity. The Phoenix launched 20 metal rods in rapid succession, each one traveling at 10% of light speed. The Zephyrian cruiser's shields might as well have been tissue paper. The projectiles tore through the alien vessel's hull and continued out the other side, leaving behind a cloud of expanding debris. Meanwhile, Captain Betty Foster was using her medical transport in ways that violated every regulation in the Colonial Navy Handbook. She had converted her ship's surgical laser into a weapon capable of cutting through Zephyrian hulls, while her cargo bays had been filled with modified medical nanobots that could eat through alien electronics. Releasing nanobots, Foster announced, as her ship flew through a formation of enemy fighters. The microscopic machines spread out behind her vessel like a cloud of death, attaching themselves to Zephyrian ships and beginning their destructive work. Dr. Helen Carter was aboard the human flagship, coordinating the biological warfare aspects of their attack. Her understanding of the Devastator's weaknesses was proving invaluable as human forces continued to exploit every vulnerability she had identified. The creatures are still connected through their neural network, she reported to Admiral Park. Even though Jake's disruptors have damaged their coordination, we can use that network against them. Helen's team had developed a biological agent that could spread through the Devastator's shared consciousness, causing them to attack each other instead of human ships. The agent was delivered through modified medical drones that could penetrate. The creature's organic armor. Jake Morrison was still moving between the disabled Devastators, gathering intelligence and planting additional disruptors. His stealth suit allowed him to move undetected through the battlefield, and he was using that advantage to maximum effect. Each Devastator Jake visited provided more information about Zephyrian technology and tactics. He was downloading their navigation data, communication protocols, and weapon specifications. This intelligence would be crucial for future battles against the alien empire. But Jake's most important discovery was the location of the Zephyrian homeworlds. The Devastator's computers contained detailed star charts showing every world under alien control, along with the positions of their military bases and supply depots. Admiral Park, Jake transmitted over his secure communicator. I've found their entire military network. Every base, every supply route, every weakness in their empire. The battle was turning into a complete rout as more Zephyrian ships succumbed to the spreading virus or fell victim to human weapons. Admiral Crix realized that his forces were not just losing this battle, they were being completely destroyed. Admiral, Vex reported with panic in his voice. "The humans are broadcasting our tactical frequencies. They're sending false orders to our ships, causing them to attack each other." Crix watched in horror as one of his own battleships opened fire on its escort vessels, believing it was engaging human targets. The virus had corrupted the ship's sensors so completely that its crew could not tell friend from enemy. Human ships continued to appear and disappear throughout the battle zone, using their modified FTL drives to strike and vanish before the Zephyrians could respond. It was like fighting ghosts that could materialize anywhere and strike without warning. The human cargo ship Buffalo had been converted into a massive bomb, its holds filled with antimatter that could destroy everything within 1,000 kilometers. Captain Steve Miller guided his vessel toward the largest concentration of enemy ships, knowing he would not survive the mission. "For Earth," Miller said as he activated the antimatter containment failure sequence. The Buffalo vanished in a flash of pure energy that took out 12 Zephyrian cruisers and damaged dozens more. Similar sacrifices were happening throughout the human fleet as crews chose to ram their damaged ships into enemy vessels rather than retreat. The humans were fighting with a desperation and creativity that the Zephyrians had never encountered before. Admiral Park coordinated the final phase of the assault from her flagship bridge. "All ships converge on the enemy command vessel. We end this now." Every functional human ship in the fleet began jumping toward Crix's flagship, their weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would decapitate the Zephyrian command structure. The alien admiral realized that his empire's conquest had finally met an enemy. It could not defeat. Jake Morrison was making his way back toward the human fleet when he received a priority transmission from Dr. Carter. "Jake, we need you to plant one more device. This one will ensure that the Zephyrians can never threaten anyone again." The device Carter wanted him to place was a quantum virus transmitter that would spread their malicious code to every Zephyrian world simultaneously. It would turn their entire civilization's technology against them, causing the collapse of their empire from within. As Jake changed course toward Crix's flagship, he reflected on how far humanity had come in just a few hours. They had faced impossible odds and found a way to win through creativity, sacrifice, and the refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy was about to learn that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Battle of Sol ended 18 hours after it began, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy for generations. Not a single Zephyrian ship escaped to report what had happened, but the virus Jake Morrison had planted in their communication network carried the story to every corner of their empire. Admiral Crix died when his flagship was destroyed by concentrated fire from 20 human vessels that appeared around it simultaneously. His last transmission was a warning that would never be received by his home world. The quantum virus had already reached Zephyrian space and was spreading through their computer networks like digital wildfire. Jake Morrison returned to Earth as humanity's greatest hero. But the experience had changed him in ways that few people could understand. He had seen the best and worst of what intelligent species could accomplish, and he carried that knowledge with him as he addressed the United Nations Assembly. "For too long, the strong have preyed upon the weak among the stars," Jake said, his words being broadcast not just to Earth, but to dozens of worlds through captured Zephyrian communication networks. "Species have been conquered because they fought by the old rules, using conventional tactics against unconventional enemies." In the assembly hall, representatives from every human colony listened as Jake continued his speech. Behind him, holographic displays showed the destruction the Zephyrians had caused on 17 worlds, followed by images of their defeat at Earth. "But humans don't play by anyone else's rules," Jake declared. "We adapt, we innovate, and we never surrender. When faced with impossible odds, we find impossible solutions." The virus Jake had planted was working exactly as Dr. Helen Carter had designed it. Across the Zephyrian Empire, computer systems were failing in cascade failures that crippled their military and government. Ships were stranded in space as their navigation systems failed. Devastator units turned on their own creators as their programming was corrupted. Within weeks of the Battle of Sol, rebellions broke out on every world the Zephyrians had conquered. The slave species they had oppressed for centuries suddenly found their oppressors helpless, unable to coordinate their forces or maintain control of their territory. Dr. Carter's research had revealed something remarkable about human psychology compared to other species. While most intelligent races developed advanced technology and then became dependent on it, humans retained the ability to think beyond their tools. They could imagine solutions that their computers could not calculate. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, Carter explained to a gathering of xenobiologists from across human space. We're not the smartest or the most advanced, but we're the most adaptable, and in a universe full of challenges, adaptability is the ultimate survival trait. Admiral Lisa Park found herself in command of humanity's first interstellar military force as delegations from across the galaxy arrived at Earth. Some came seeking alliance against the collapsing Zephyrian Empire. Others came to study human military tactics. All came with a new respect for the species that had achieved the impossible. The Galactic Council, which had been powerless to stop the Zephyrian expansion, sent their most senior diplomats to establish formal relations with humanity. They offered technology, trade agreements, and military support in exchange for human tactical knowledge. We've spent centuries trying to stop species like the Zephyrians through conventional means, explained Ambassador Tieran, a tall being from the Altair system. Your victory has shown us that conventional thinking was our limitation, not theirs. Jake Morrison was offered command positions in a dozen different military organizations, but he chose to remain with his original crew aboard the Wanderer. Earth needed explorers and intelligence gatherers more than it needed another admiral, and Jake's team had proven their effectiveness in ways that no traditional military unit could match. Lisa Park worked with human engineers to develop new military doctrines based on the lessons learned during the battle. The key principles were flexibility over firepower, creativity over conventional wisdom, and the understanding that sometimes the best way to win was to change the rules entirely. Bobby Kane became head of a new engineering division tasked with developing unconventional weapons and tactics. His first project was a fleet of ships designed specifically for the kind of jump-and-strike tactics that had proven so effective against the Zephyr IANS. Dr. Helen Carter established the Xenobiological Warfare Institute, dedicated to understanding alien species well enough to find weaknesses that could be exploited if diplomacy failed. Her motto was simple: know your enemy better than they know themselves. As reports came in from across the galaxy, it became clear that the Zephyrian Empire was collapsing completely. Their centralized command structure and dependence on networked technology had made them vulnerable to exactly the kind of attack humans had developed. Former Zephyrian colonies were declaring independence daily. The massive Devastator units were being dismantled by their former victims, who had learned from human broadcasts how to disable the creatures permanently. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was reduced to isolated groups, hiding on remote worlds. The galaxy is free, Jake said during a private conversation with Admiral Park, as they watched ships from dozens of species dock at Earth's first orbital station. Not because we're the strongest, but because we refuse to accept that strong equals invincible. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Species that had lived in fear for generations were exploring space again, forming new alliances and sharing technology. The rigid hierarchies that had made them vulnerable to conquest were being replaced by flexible networks of cooperation the human influence spread, not through conquest, but through example. Other species began adopting human military tactics, human diplomatic methods, and human approaches to problem solving. The galaxy was learning to think differently about challenges that had seemed impossible to overcome. Children on distant worlds learned the story of Captain Jake Morrison and the Battle of Seoul. They learned that no problem was truly impossible if you were willing to think beyond conventional solutions. They learned that creativity and determination could overcome any advantage in size or technology. The legend had begun, and it would grow with each retelling. Across the galaxy, when faced with impossible odds, beings would ask themselves the question that was becoming famous on 1,000 worlds. What would a human do? And sometimes that question would save them all. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weapon was not any technology or tactic, but the simple refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. In a universe full of wonders and dangers, that might be the most powerful force of all.